Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I rise to speak in this debate because I'm very, very excited about the initiatives that this government is taking to grow the New Zealand economy. But before I do, I must point out to the previous speaker a certain fact of life. If the Department of Corrections is growing to the extent that it is that the fault of the government that's been in office for 22 months or the government that was in office for 108 months prior to that? Because it is that government that left the legacy of the growing numbers for corrections to deal with. And in fact, soon after I got the opportunity to sit round John Key's cabinet table, we were shown a graph which was the legacy of the spiralling numbers of prisoners left by the previous government that we are dealing with, which we have already managed down, and we're looking to manage down further, but that is a legacy of the previous government that sits in front of this government right now. And right across the public services that New Zealanders value, the big issues, Mr Speaker, are getting New Zealand to grow faster. Getting to New Zealand to grow faster is how we afford these services. And the government has a massive economic growth agenda that is unfolding as we speak.
I'm sorry to interrupt the Honourable Minister. This discussion and yelling across is not acceptable. Let's concentrate on the debate. If you want to interject against the Speaker, that's fine, but this other dialogue is not called for. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's all right. I know the other side's been under a bit of pressure lately, but look, the economic growth agenda is very, very important, not just to this government but to the country, because it is all about getting New Zealand to grow faster. And this government has an agenda that is unfolding day by day, Mr Speaker. Personal tax reform will take place on 1st of October this year, where we'll have most New Zealanders paying a top personal tax rate of 17.5 cents. That is a magnificent achievement that will encourage people to work hard, get ahead and keep more of their own money. In the new highways area, one that I happen to know a little bit about, projects around the country are growing quickly. The Kopu Bridge in the Coromandel is just marked 1 year's progress. The Victoria Park Tunnel, which many Aucklanders drive past every day, is growing rapidly, and shortly they're going to shift Nikki Kay's birdcage over from one side to the other side to get the tunnel done. But the other one, Mr Speaker, is that last week I was able to announce the bringing forward by around 7 years as a result of tolling for the Tauranga Eastern Link in Tauranga. Brought forward about 7 years. It's a 23-kilometre four-lane highway. That was a press release this government made on the 29th of July last week, Mr Speaker, as we progress our economic growth agenda. And then today, just to pick another random example, you have the Finance Minister and the Minister of State Services out there saying we're going to have a very, very close look at the policy expenditure of government, which has ballooned out hugely over the last many years. And I think, looking at Mr Ryle and Mr English, I'm confident that they will have a very, very close look at the policy purchasing process of government, and that's part of actually our economic growth agenda, is keeping government expenditure under control, because it is only by keeping government expenditure under control that you can actually keep the pressure off interest rates, and lower interest rates are about what allows the economy to grow. There's a whole range of things, Mr Speaker. There's the science investment that we've announced in the budget. That's a very important investment, and this government is very serious about the country's investment in science and innovation. There's a small matter of employment law reforms, which is very, very important, announced by the Prime Minister just a couple of weeks ago at a conference in Auckland, and it is a very, very important and yet reasonable and moderate reform of employment law, which is going to achieve a huge amount in terms of giving employers the flexibility and, if you like, the confidence to employ new workers, and that's already having in the workforce. It'll be quite helpful for the Labor Party, I suspect, when it comes to hiring a replacement in Te Atatu, and I think the employment law reforms are big positive steps forward in our economic growth agenda. We're also putting more money into tourism, he said, picking another one randomly from the list. More money in tourism was announced this year, and that's very good for New Zealand's very important tourism industry. We're lowering company taxes to 28 cents in the dollar from the current 30 cents in the dollar, Mr Speaker. That is a good contribution to the economic growth agenda. We looked at some of the issues around productive land in the South Island and said we have to do something about removing the log jams for irrigation in Canterbury. We said we had to make some calls. We had some issues there with the battle between regional councils and frankly within regional councils about coming up with a water policy for Canterbury. Very important, big productive part of the New Zealand economy. So we've taken the steps that the other side acknowledged they should have taken. I think it was Trevor Mallard that came out after we made the change and said, oh yeah, we were going to do that. It only took them 9 years to think about it. It hadn't happened. So that's a very important part of the economic growth agenda. Aquaculture. Now, aquaculture is very important for the growth of the New Zealand economy, and the reality is that under the previous government we had a moratorium in aquaculture, and then, as the Minister of Fisheries points out, their step forward from there was to extend the moratorium a bit longer. So there were the issues. There was a situation in aquaculture where the industry was frozen. We have unfrozen it, Mr Speaker, and we're moving forward. Ultra-fast broadband is another one, and I was pleased to be able to come down to the House to speak today because we've just made a press release today that the final refined proposals have been received by Crown Fibre Holdings to deliver ultra-fast broadbanding. They've received proposals from a total of 15 parties. A number of the original respondents have formed new consortia or indicated a willingness to do so, and are now in the process of crunching through those bids. And it's a contestable process, which is very exciting because it's going to get the best price for the government and the best price for taxpayers, and it's going to give us ultra-fast broadband right around the country to the 75% of homes as soon as we possibly can. And I think that's very exciting, Mr Speaker, because that will help growth, because once you have given that opportunity to people, they can work from their own homes, they can increase the size of their businesses, and most importantly, they can communicate with the wider world, and that will allow them to achieve more. Mr Speaker, you can then move on to things like trade negotiations. Now, we've got Tim Grosser and Murray McCulley out around the world for two reasons, really. One is because it keeps them out of here, and the other one is because they're advancing our trade negotiation agenda, Mr Speaker, and they are working very, very hard advancing that trade negotiations agenda because they know that New Zealand is a country of traders, Mr Speaker, and the only way we can get ahead in the world is trade more. And interestingly, Mr Speaker, the latest stats on that are out, and we are trading more since the new government came along. That the exports are increasing, Mr Speaker. Just the other day, merchandise trade data for June shows a 6.8% increase in export values over the June quarter, and we have a trade surplus, quarterly trade surplus of $389 million, which is the largest since September 2001, which is about when the previous government lost interest in the tradable economy, Mr Speaker, and we have been working to grow exports, and just the trade negotiations are just one part of that, Mr Speaker. I'd also like to touch on, if I could, export education, because that's all part of the trade exercise, and we've now had 2 years of year-on-year growth in international student numbers in this country. So we've had a 7% rise in the number of fee-paying international students for the first 4 months of this year compared to last year. I was able to announce this last week, Mr Speaker, and we also had that was an increase that was on top of 6% the year before. So there we are, we're growing the international education sector, and that does a number of things. Firstly, it brings income into the country. That's very, very important. Again, something that the previous crowd forgot about. You actually got to earn your way in the world. The second thing it does is it brings income into the institutions, which is also important. And of course you have lots of crocodile tears shed on that side of the house for the institutions, but they don't actually work to increase and help them increase their revenue streams. So this is all good progress, Mr Speaker, and it's part of the government's economic growth agenda, which will see this economy turn around. I'm excited to be part of Budget 2010 because this, Mr Speaker, is going to help us close those gaps with Australia and with the wider world, and that's what this government is all about.
I call order. I call the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow Mr Joyce, who starts by saying that the agenda of the government is unfolding day